Hey guys, we're going to read chapter 11 of George Washington's Socks, and Shelby wanted a front row seat in our reading today. You've got a friend. I'll be all right. I'll be all right, Matt told himself as he sat next to Israel, who had fallen asleep with his arm over Matt's shoulder. Matt tried closing his eyes, but he was too frightened to sleep as he watched the soldiers that were gathering on the shore. Matt hadn't spent much time away from home, except for summer visits to his grandparents, and even then his parents had called him on the phone every other day to see how he was doing. He closed his eyes now and imagined that he was talking to his mother on the phone. "Oh, hi Mom, how are you?" "Me? Oh, I'm great. I'm just hanging out with the 18th century. Behave myself? Don't worry, Mom. George Washington and a few of his friends are here to see to that. Home? I don't know when I'll be back, but I will come back, I promise." But what if he couldn't get back? How would his parents feel with both of their children missing? Matt began to imagine his mother's face as she looked into their bedrooms at night, only to find their beds empty. "I'll get back. Don't worry, Mom. Somehow I'll figure out a way, and I will get back," Matt said as he hugged his knees to his chest. For the first time in his life, Matt was glad he had done his homework. If he hadn't done that history report, he probably wouldn't even know where he was right now. He looked to his left and saw a group of soldiers unloading a large cannon. He noticed that they were all dressed in the same blue uniforms, blue coats, dirty buff pants, and blue stockings. Most of them were wearing black three-cornered hats. They had ropes and hatchets tied to white straps that crisscrossed their chests. A dozen men had rolled the cannon off the boat and were trying to pull it onto the shore. Suddenly, a large, heavy-set officer approached. Matt could tell that he was an officer of high rank from his ornate uniform and sword. "Major Crane," the officer bellowed in a deep voice, have the 3-pounders come ashore yet?" "No," the major answered. "We've been waiting for them." "There will be another scow crossing. They shouldn't be on it." "They should be on it," the colonel told him. "Go easy on the men, John. They've a good piece of work to do yet. Do you like the story so far? Yeah, it's good, right?" he said, nodding to the group of soldiers who were dragging the cannon. "She's a pretty good student, isn't she?" "Yes, sir, Colonel Knox. Hey, that name should sound familiar." And the major replied. Matt couldn't believe his ears. "It's Henry Knox! It's really him!" he thought excitedly. Matt had written 3 whole pages of his history report on the remarkable feats of Henry Knox and the men of his artillery division. They watched as the huge Colonel Knox directed another group of soldiers in the unloading of some smaller guns. So that's what the bookseller from Boston looks like, Matt thought, smiling to himself. He remembered reading how the 280-pound Henry had turned his bookstore in Boston over to his brother so he could join up and fight the British. Henry Knox was a patriot at heart and couldn't bear to see his country under the unfair rule of King George. He was smart and strong and full of spirit, so even though he lacked experience, Henry Knox was given command of the Continental Artillery Regiment. He had led an expedition all the way up to Fort Ticonderoga in order to round up some big guns, much needed in the Boston siege. Overcoming incredible obstacles, he had led his men back 300 miles to Boston, dragging some 50 cannons, howitzers, and mortars on ox-drawn sleds. Matt remembered reading that without Henry Knox and his artillery, many a battle would have been lost. Matt also knew that General Washington was depending on these remaining 18 guns for his attack on Trenton. As Matt sat watching, he saw General Washington approach Colonel Knox and Major Crane. Henry Knox looked at the general and shook his head. "We're hours behind with this darn storm," he muttered. "It will surely be daybreak before we can reach the town." General Washington looked out across the river. "Yes, the storm is working against us," he said, frowning, "and yet it may work with us. For if this turbulence continues, God granting, the day will be dark." "It's a miracle we haven't lost a boat yet with all this ice," Major Crane sighed. "If we could only expedite the crossing," he complained. "Patience, John, patience," the general whispered, placing his hand on the young officer's shoulder. It was a gesture that reminded Matt of his own father. Just last Saturday night, they had stood that way out in their backyard. Matt remembered how impatiently he had been waiting for a hamburger as his father stood cooking them over the grill. "Hang on, champ," Mr. Carleton had said, while Matt shifted from foot to foot impatiently. "We've got to let this cow cook a bit," his father laughed, putting his hand on Matt's shoulder. "You've just got to learn to be more patient, Matt." "If only you could see me now, Dad," Matt thought. "You wouldn't believe how patient I've become, sitting here waiting for George Washington to lead me into battle." As Matt fell asleep, he began to dream of being at home in his backyard with his family. He felt safe and warm and at peace. Colonel Knox suddenly appeared in the dream, saying, "Come on now, lads, hurry up, hurry up." The colonel's voice was suddenly getting louder as Matt began to wake up. Hurry up now, lads," the colonel called, nudging Matt and then Israel. Matt rubbed his eyes in confusion. "Dad?" Matt said sleepily. "We won't be seeing your dad today, lad. Come along. We've got to catch up to General Greene's patrol. Hurry now, on your feet," a deep voice called. Matt opened his eyes and found Captain Macaulay standing before him. He blinked hard, feeling as if he were waking from one dream into another. As Matt stood up, he noticed that Israel had slumped over beside him. He was still asleep. "Israel?" Matt shook him gently. "We've got to go now," Matt whispered. Israel opened his eyes, but it took a long while for him to fully wake up, and he seemed to have a hard time standing. "Are you okay?" Matt asked, helping him to his feet. "Okay?" Israel shook his head. "What is an okay?" he asked in a weak voice. "All right. Are you all right? You don't look so good, old goat," Matt said softly. Israel smiled weakly. "And you've got the mug of King George's horse. Now help me up with my pack, will you, Master Bright Eyes?" "Sure," Matt whispered, helping him to lift his pack onto his back. They walked side by side in a line with 4 other soldiers. With each step, Matt felt the full fury of the storm as the wind whipped through the trees, sending icy branches across the road. Up ahead, they could... Is it boring? I'm sorry. Up ahead, they could make out the dim glow of a lantern that one of the soldiers was carrying. The light flickered faintly as the snow threatened to extinguish the flame. Matt felt like he was in the middle of a hurricane. The snow mixed with sleet and cut into his face, and he buried his head in his sweatshirt. When he did steal a glance at the other men, Matt could see that they were all moving forward, with heads lowered, following almost blindly the steps of those before them. As Matt trudged along, looking neither to the left or the right, he thought about these soldiers. He knew that for security's sake, most of the men knew nothing of their destination. For many, it was enough to know that they were ridding the colonies of the rule of King George and the heavy taxes he had imposed on them. He thought about men like Henry Knox who believed in freedom and were willing to give up their lives for that cause. And yet, for others, like Israel, $6 a month was enough to bring them into the face of battle. $6, Matt muttered into a sharp stone cut into his linen-bound foot. I could spend that much in 6 minutes at the mall. Now that there is a mall, not that there is a mall anywhere near here, he thought gloomily, looking into the darkened woods. What I wouldn't give to see a mall right now with heat and electric lights and restaurants and shoe stores, but that's all 200 years away. I've got to figure out a way to get us home, he thought, stepping through an icy puddle. I wish I was home. I wish I was home right now. What'd you think? Do you like it? Hope you enjoyed chapter 11.